Good morning, everyone. My name is Jessie Sunner. I'm the MLA for Surrey Newton and the Parliamentary Secretary for Anti-Racism Initiatives, as well as the Chair of the Special Committee on Democratic and Electoral Reform, which is a parliamentary committee comprised of members of the government, the official opposition, and the third party. We are meeting today in Prince George in the territory of the Klidkay Dene First Nation. There are two parts to our committee's mandate. The first part is to examine democratic engagement, voter participation, and electoral reform. The second is to review the administration of the 2024 provincial general election. The committee is currently holding a public consultation on the first part of our mandate. For the rest of this week and next week, we'll be hearing a number of presentations about democratic and electoral reform in BC. And in addition to these presentations, our committee is also accepting written submissions until July 25th. To participate, please visit our website at bcledge.ca/consultations. I'll now ask the members of the committee to introduce themselves, starting with the Deputy Chair.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Ward Stamer, Calais North Thompson, MLA, and Opposition Critic for Forests.
MLA Botterill?
Yeah, Rob Botterill here, MLA for Saanich North and the Islands and House Leader for the Green Caucus.
MLA Shaw.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. It's Amna Shaw, the MLA for Surrey City Centre and the Parliamentary Secretary for Mental Health and Addictions.
And MLA Clare.
Good morning. Sheldon Clare, MLA for Prince George North Caribou, and I am the Conservative Caucus Deputy Whip.
Thank you. And assisting our committee today are Karn Riar and Kayla Wilson from the Parliamentary Committee's office, and Simon Delatt and Dwight Schmidt from Hansard Services. Today we will begin our presentations with Randy Thompson. Welcome, Randy, to our committee. You will start with your presentation, followed by questions from the committee. So please start when you're ready.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here and have a chance to participate in a very important subject. It's something that I've been aware of my entire life. I used to be surprised when I was a child and growing up through my life. I'd watch elections and parties with less than 40% would take power. And I'm thinking, as a child, understanding math, that's more than 60% of the voters didn't want that party in power. They wanted somebody else. And it just seemed like, well, that seems to be the system. I don't know who decided to do that. But my issue is just proportional representation. I think it's a much more equitable way of running an election. I'm Randy Thompson. I was a Green Party candidate in the provincial election last year, running for Prince George North Caribou against Sheldon Clare. And congratulations, by the way. I didn't expect to win. I'm a Green Party candidate, and I live in Redneckville. All three cities, Williams Lake, Quesnel, Prince George, are forestry mill towns. Their history has been forestry. All the good stuff has been taken, obviously, by now, and the supply of timber has gotten less and less. And so knowing that I wasn't going to win, why would I run? The idea was to bring attention and to talk about the myths of forestry and the myths of the Green Party. A lot of people misunderstand what the Green Party actually is, and there's a lot of propaganda with a ton of money behind it for forestry, talking about sustainability and all that stuff. There's a lot of misinformation, and that was my point. I wanted to go to meetings and presentations and be able to talk about what I believe to be the truth in both of those things. Voters vote in weird ways. A lot of times, people always want to win. So if the polling is saying that one group is most likely to win or they're in the lead, a lot of times people go, oh, well, everyone else is voting for them, so I'll vote for the winner because I want to be on the winning team. We just sort of group together. What are other people doing? I'll do what that is. And if you're a Green Party supporter, and you know that you're not going to win a majority, a lot of people just either won't vote or will look at it, well, I don't want that party to win. So instead of voting for who I want, I'll vote against them and I'll vote the lesser of two evils. So that's kind of where a lot of people vote. They vote for different reasons. There's also family loyalty. When I was younger, my father, who owned a construction company, said, I will never vote for the NDP. And that stuck with me. I never have voted for the NDP out of loyalty to my father. Whether that's right or wrong, it's just how some people vote. It's just like your history, your family, you're loyal to things. It's I think, not necessarily wrong to vote against something. I ran for the Green Party. But in the federal election, I'm proud to say I voted for the Liberals because I was voting against the Conservatives after all the stuff that was going on with Trump and the 51st state. And a lot of us, like, I'm thankful for what was put out, because I'm a bit of a content creator on Facebook and social media, and I posted the video that Trump's saying blah, blah, blah. Polyev, blah, 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 same thing, back and forth. Trump, Polyev, Trump, he's saying exactly the same thing, using the exact same words. And I think it scared a lot of people that we don't necessarily want to become the 51st state. So I just thought, I'm going to have to vote against the Conservatives and vote for the party that's most likely to win, which would be the Liberals. If I voted for the Green Party, that would be what I wanted to do. But I knew that that would just become a number somewhere and would mean nothing as far as the end result. So people vote for different reasons. Proportional representation means that your vote can actually count for something. Instead of it just being between Sheldon and I, it's all or nothing. Whoever wins, that's it. He takes it. It doesn't really count for anything for anybody else. Your vote can mean something because as the total percentage of votes, if there's a certain percentage of party votes, then a certain percentage of MLA. You get a broader representation in government of what the people actually think, not who got the most first past the post, winner take all kind of thing. And it's really just not fair to the people who go through the process of voting and their vote ends up meaning nothing. Another thing I'd like to talk about is lobbying. I think lobbying should be banned. In 2023, there was over 1,200 lobbying meetings with the NDP for oil and gas. That's about 3 every day through the whole year. I mean, of course, some days there'd be 6. And what do you think the oil and gas industry lobbyists were saying? We think that, well, the citizens of British Columbia should get the fair shake, and we are worried about the environment. We're going to do everything we can to make our... No, they're talking about we want to get as much as we can, as quickly as we can, with the least amount of cost. How can we do that? And it seems like the NDP used to be what the Green Party is now. It's kind of the common sense party. It seems like, and we've seen it all before, that parties get in and then they get corrupted. Politicians say something and then when they get in, we see now that because of all the paperwork of the last party, we can't do what we said we were going to do. So there's like a breaking of promises. And there seems to be a corruption and people lose faith in voting for who they want because it doesn't matter anyway. They're just going to do whatever they want when they get in. They're going to toe the party line, and that's going to be it. And that's not fair to the issues. When someone gets a majority, it's kind of like talk to the hand sort of thing. It doesn't matter. We don't need you. We've got enough votes. We can carry whatever we want. And it's like your vote doesn't really count for anything. I believe that proportional representation more broadly represents the public at large because a percentage of whoever voted for whatever party at least gets some kind of representation in the legislature. It seems to me to be a more compassionate and intelligent way of dividing up the power. Of course, the people that win want to keep it the way it is because they have all the power. And it's, in my opinion, just not the way things should be done. Proportional representation will leave you confidently voting for who you really want to. Vote for who you think is the right party to at least be partially represented, as opposed to, I don't like these guys, I'm going to vote for the other guy, less of, the worst of both things. Anyway, and research has shown that proportional representation outperforms, winner take all in democracy, quality of life, income equality, environmental issues, and fiscal policy, just controlling the way that government spends, because you're getting more involvement from other parties and other representations. If you get voted in, you can be who you want to be and stick to your morals and bring up the issues that are important, as opposed to just, it doesn't really matter, we don't need you, we've got enough power already. So that's basically what I wanted to say, that I think proportional representation is a much fairer way to run a government and have more involvement from other parties. You don't have to necessarily give the power away, but you should be able to at least listen to it. I used to watch Sonia Furstenau. I was on the council for the BC Green Party for 2 years, so I know Sonia, and I'd see her do a great speech in the legislature, and it's like I was the thumping of on the desk and the hooting and hollering, and like the party in power is sort of like and then just nothing for her, It's just she would do her presentation and that would be it, and it's like it just seems like an old boys club, which frustrates a lot of us just watching it. Anyway, I would have loved to have had a chance to be involved in the government, but that's not the way things worked out. And I think the Green Party deserves more credit for what they're trying to do. We can't just keep taking stuff out of the forest forever and killing habitat and expect beautiful British Columbia to continue to be beautiful British Columbia. So that's what I have to say.
Thank you, Randy. Are there any questions? Deputy Chair.
Thanks very much, Madam Chair, and thanks very much, Randy, for your comments. When you're talking about proportional representation, and we always come back to there's always going to be a segment of the population that may not support an MLA's views or a party's views, but how do you overcome those numbers? Because you're still, like, for example, you could still win 60% of the vote in a particular riding. So there's still 40% of the people that actually voted still didn't vote for you, right? And so do you think that by having proportional representation, you're going to have other candidates with other views, whether it's Green or NDP or Independent or whatever else, but do you also think that there would be more people more inclined to vote in the election, knowing that there would be an opportunity for their voice to be heard? That was actually one of the points I was going to bring up, because a lot of people have apathy and they just don't care anymore, and they don't think, what's the point? Why bother voting? I've got a bridge game to go to or whatever. They don't vote because they don't feel that it actually counts. And in proportional representation, your vote counts to the percentage, not necessarily just your riding. And then you go like, I may not win my riding, but my vote actually means something. And I think that will encourage more people to vote and actually vote for who they think is the right choice, as opposed to who they think is going to win. I think it's an important point. Sure. Thanks. You're welcome.
I have a question. So you spoke about pro-rep. Are there any models of pro-rep or any suggestions that you have of what you would like to see?
I haven't studied all the different examples, but one thing I do remember on the last time we voted, there was 2 different representations of proportional representation that we could vote for. And I think that confused people. That I think what we also need is education. We need to educate. I think in our schools, we need to tell people, what does it mean to be conservative? What does it mean to be NDP? What does the Green Party stand for? We need to understand what we're actually voting for. So before proportional representation, is brought in, I think people need to understand what it is first. Because I was confused on the last one. I'm looking at it going, I understand the basics of what proportional representation is, but there's two different versions here. And I'm kind of like going, I don't know. I was reading the details of it. I remember being confused that, okay, now I have two of them. I have to pick one of them. And I think it confused a lot of people, and they just said, I'm just going to go with the old party standard. Sometimes the devil that you know kind of thing. So I don't have examples, but I do know I've studied, like, research shows that more compassionate and broader decisions are made when you involve more people in the decision-making process.
Thank you. MLA Shaw.
Thank you, Randy, for your presentation. Up until now, we've heard from presenters who are in favor of proportional representation, who have indicated that if we were to make such recommendations, that we do not recommend another referendum, because, and their arguments varied from, we've done this before, or some even said that the response on prior referenda were quite decisive, and we don't need to go that route again. Wondering what your thoughts are on that, and whether the electorate should have an opportunity to go about this question again.
Well, I mean, simply things change. Before the federal election, it was clear that Conservatives were going to win, and something changed, and all of a sudden we went, whoa, hold it. And we changed our mind and went in a completely different direction. We are proud. I think it awoken the pride of being a Canadian. So I think that the last referendum on it was a totally different electorate, and people have been through a bunch of different experiences. And I think the frustration of the winner-take-all system, if you educate people to what it actually is, I think, and I've heard people talk about this, the last representation was purposely represented by confusing people the way they did with the two different choices, to kind of muddy the waters a little bit, and then they go, I don't know. Like, I think if you're clear and you say exactly what it is, and whether you have a referendum or not, I think the people need to understand. There's a lot of ignorance around politics in our population, and most people just go, I don't know. I don't know. I just close my eyes and pick somebody. A lot of people don't understand, and I don't understand why we can't educate them or teach them or put some of the media towards telling people what parties actually mean and who their allegiance is with and who's controlling them. Because there's that sort of thought that in the shadows, political parties are being pulled by corporate greed and like I said, in the lobbying idea. That's sort of a belief a lot of people have. I've had conversations with many people that they go, well, it doesn't matter who I vote for, they're all going to get corrupted anyway. So if we have a broader spectrum of different parties within that basket, we're not going to get everybody corrupted in that same majority way. That the NDP is famous for making MLAs toe the party line, and if you can't vote independently on your own conscience or own, then you're just all clones of each other, With the proportional representation, I think you just get a broader appeal of the citizens of the province, not just the party that's in power.
Thank you. MLA Botterill.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Randy, for your presentation. I've been chided a bit this morning not to ask leading questions. So I won't make this a leading question. What I will say is that we have had presentations over the last couple of days on the issue of whether or not a referendum. And one of the options that has been raised by presenters is to implement a form, if the committee and the government were to proceed, to implement a form of proportional representation and then try it out and then have a referendum to see if citizens wish to continue with that form of electoral system. What's your view on that?
I think that's like I was talking about education. I mean, people have a hard time picturing something. If you give them an actual representation, they can get it. You know, like if you see what's working, what's not working, how this is working, then you go, oh, okay, now I get it. You know, I think they need an example as opposed to just words on a page, because a lot of people have trouble grasping a concept unless they see it and see how it's functioning. So I think that would probably be a good idea. At least it would educate people as to what proportional representation actually means, because they could see an example of it.
Okay.
Okay, I don't see any further questions. Thank you, Randy, for your presentation and for taking our questions this morning.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
I appreciate it. I switched my schedule around because I work 4 days, 4 nights. I got 4 on, 4 off. And I was supposed to work last night until 6 o'clock this morning. Ooh. And then I was going to drive here and do this and then drive home and then work tonight at 6 o'clock. So it was like, it was important. I was going to do it. And my wife's going, why don't you take the day off tomorrow? So I took yesterday off so I could at least sleep, because it was like, I was willing to do it because it's an important issue, but yeah.
And thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for
I
your
appreciate
commitment
it.
to this.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have Matthew Nielsen. Welcome, Matthew. So you'll be beginning with your presentation, and then once you're done, we'll move on to questions.
Most certainly.
Thank you.
Okay. Hello, Honourable Committee. I know I sit before you today to speak towards the benefits of electoral reform. Firstly, I'd like to recognize that we're on the unceded territory of the Coatlicue people. And then allow me to introduce myself. My name is Matthew Nielsen. I am a business person in Prince George, and I've lived here most of my life. I went to school and even did university here, as Sheldon may remember. I did my degree in history and political science up at UNBC, where I learned about different electoral systems, and I bring some of that past knowledge with me today. I first would like to start this discussion with the issues of the first past the post system, and then which creates voter apathy through regionalism and through political stagnation. And then I'm going to walk through a couple electoral systems I think would be good fits for British Columbia. Firstly is the issue of regionalism. BC is a very large province, as we all are probably aware, and it has a very dense population in Victoria, Vancouver, and Kelowna. However, in the northern region, where we're kind of now, we have a sparsely populated area with a couple urban centers and a lot of smaller rural communities around us. In these communities, we have a lot of natural resources which are extracted. And often a lot of these communities feel as if they don't have control over their own resources, because many of the decisions are made by parties which are elected often in Vancouver or Kelowna or Victoria. This feeling of not being able to control our own resources often leads to a feeling of frustration and not being able to control our own economies, leading people to ask what the point of voting is, as they feel like they have no control over their decisions. Moving on to the next issue of political stagnation. In the North, we've had one party for as long as I can remember. And it didn't change until recently with the dissolution of the BC Liberal Party and the retirement of 2 of the candidates, which held the seats. This lack of change and inability to change frustrates a lot of people that I know who may not feel represented or feel underrepresented by the parties that are in our area. You will also, if you take a look at the elections results for our areas, you'll see a declining number of people turning out to vote. Approximately 54,000 people voted amongst the 3 electoral districts were in Prince George. The last election, Prince George have a population of about 80,000 people. It's a little less, but that also doesn't take into consideration how large these districts are, because these are large geographic districts. and there's many more than just Prince George voting in those areas. The low voter turnout is created by the fact that the opposition and even those that vote for the BC Liberal Party, and likely now the BC Conservative Party, don't feel like they need to go out and vote. Those supporting the incumbent party know they're going to win, and those that vote against the party know they have little hope in changing the results. Now I want to switch rails and look at the two different electoral systems I kind of wanted to go over and I think would be good fits to alleviate these issues. The first electoral system I'd like to mention is the mixed member proportional system, which is used by Australia and Germany, respectively. This system accounts for the large geographic spaces in districts with dense urban areas. It creates spaces for local candidates and a regional member to represent these areas. This means that districts are multi-membered, so they have local seats with a regional representative. The majority of seats would still be local MLAs and still won through systems similar to first past the post. However, there'd be regional representation to help influence areas that have lower representation. The other system was designed by Fair Vote Canada and hasn't been used in any other Western democracies yet, but it takes into account Canadian regionalism by creating 3 different electoral kind of areas. You have a single member electoral district for rural areas with a larger multi-member areas for urban areas. And then there would be a regional top-up for areas that need more representation and have less influence in the House. And that's going to be my presentation today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Randy. Oh, sorry. Thank you so much, Matthew. Question from MLA Clare.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hello, Matthew. Good to see you again.
Nice seeing you as well, Sheldon.
And my question was, you were talking about an option where there would be more regional representation. In Canada, the federal power has a bicameral setup.
Yeah.
And there are, I think Newfoundland allows for a bicameral setup provincially, and I think Quebec is another one that has that capability. Are you thinking that a bicameral setup might be a way to get around regional representation issues by adding a different house to British Columbia? Is that as a possibility?
It could be. I would have to take a deeper look into it, but yeah, that could be very well one way to help regional areas by maybe, like you said, creating another house.
Okay. Thank you.
Emily Botterill.
Thanks for your presentation this morning. I think you, in your presentation, have zeroed in on an issue that we've certainly heard over the last couple of days, but it's great to hear from folks actually in the area that has this issue, which is huge ridings, lack of control over resource decisions because they're made in the South, and a feeling of, in your words, feeling that votes wasted either because the MLA will always win of a particular party, so why bother voting, or why bother voting because the MLA will always win, and my views will never be reflected in the outcome. The solution that one of the solutions you're proposing is regional, a regional top-up, and I'd be interested from your perspective how you could see that working. MLA Clare has a massive riding. So if you're going to do a regional top-up, it might involve a region that is broader than MLA Clare's riding. And so how would that particular MLA in the regional setting, do we need to buy them a jet, or how do they stay in touch with their constituents? How do you see that working?
My thought process would be that you would likely have 2 members, and my hope would be that they would take some time and go out and interact with each community, but that would take a lot of resources to do. So I don't necessarily have a good answer for that, because the geographic space does not make it easy to answer just how do you get to speaking with everybody in every community.
Okay.
Yeah.
Deputy Chair.
Thanks very much, Chair. Yeah, thanks very much, Matthew. Just to further on to what MLA Bottrell was speaking of, are you familiar with what they do in Scotland?
If I remember correctly, Scotland uses the mixed member proportional system as well.
Right.
Yeah.
So they end up having every portion of the country in regions.
Mm-hmm.
So it would be the same scenario here, where if you've got, again, one of the challenges, of course, is when you get to the legislature now with 93 members, there's not a whole lot of room left. Mm-hmm. And Scotland, basically, when they changed their system, they had to build a brand new building for half a £500,000. I could just imagine what it would cost for us to build a new building.
Yeah.
But having said that, there are probably ways to do that, as you said, where you could have, if there was 3 MLAs up here, there could be a change where one of those MLAs would actually be a regional MLA.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not exactly sure how that would work. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not saying that's what you would do, but is that something that you could envision?
Yeah.
Where you would have, in that scenario, you, instead of having the 3 MLAs, in this, you possibly could have the two MLAs and 1 regional MLA.
Mm-hmm. That would be something along the lines I was thinking. Like, there'd be probably, because the north is so big, but probably 2 regional northern or 1 regional north MLA, and then 2 for like Prince George and going further down, just because it is such a vast area. And
mm-hmm. Understood. Yeah, I'm just curious, because how that would actually, as Emily Bottrell said, how would you logistically be able to cover that area short of having a helicopter at your disposal?
Yeah, I wish I had an answer for that. It's something I've tried, or I've thought on for a little bit, and I haven't come up with anything good yet.
Good, thanks for that.
I also have a question just building on all of this, is I think as we've been hearing about this and we think more about the logistics, so, and just if you have thoughts on this, is if you have the local MLAs and your regional MLAs, would you see a difference in their duties in the House and in the and also in the region, given that some folks are representing specific areas and others are the larger region? And also, how would you consolidate the viewpoint differences if they're from different parties?
Yeah. My hope would be that, at least for the last part of your question, if they, to consolidate, like, if they're from different parties, I would hope they would be willing to work together. And one thing I really like about proportional representation is that it does really force parties to try and work together instead of fighting against one another. As for the rest of your question, I'm sorry, I don't really have a good answer.
That's okay. I think we're all kind of talking through it.
Yeah.
MLA Shaw?
Thank you, Chair. You had mentioned the second system.
Mm-hmm.
But, is there a name for
It's called the Rural-Urban Proportional System. It
okay.
was specifically designed by Fairvote Canada to kind of tackle Canada's issues of geography.
Perfect. Thank you.
No problem.
MLA Bottrell, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, thanks very much. In terms of in terms of the legislature itself, I know that in the UK they have benches as opposed to desks in order to create more room, and that's been raised in the last couple of days. What's your view on switching from desks to benches? And then I have one more follow-up.
I think the benches would probably be better just because you're not necessarily, it invites more of a working together feeling because you're all sharing the same seat. You're not sitting independently of one another at different desks.
Okay. And then my other follow-up is, in your experience during COVID, and you know, when there was limited ability to interact in person, how did you see MLAs in this area, or how was that obstacle overcome?
Unfortunately, during most of COVID, I didn't live in BC. I lived in Ontario, so I wouldn't be able to answer that question.
Okay.
I moved just before and moved back right after.
Okay.
Okay, are there any further questions? No. Thank you, Matthew, for taking the time to present to us this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Elizabeth Van Gool. Good morning, Elizabeth, and welcome to the committee.
Thank you.
Just a reminder, you'll have time to present to the committee, followed by questions from us.
Okay. Okay. Yes, as I said, my name is Elizabeth. I live in Prince George, and I've also lived in Fort St. John. I'm here today because of emails I received in May. The email stated that there was going to be electoral reform hearings coming up in BC, and anyone who wanted to present, just sign up here kind of thing. I ignored that email because I thought somebody else will do it and they'll be so much better at it than I am. But then I got another email saying that they found that oftentimes in the north here especially, these meetings are very sparsely attended, and that sometimes gives politicians a view that nobody up here cares about proportional representation, and then they don't do anything. And so anyway, I was upset. If I were a cartoon character, steam would have been coming out of my ears. And so anyway, I was just like, okay, clicked on the registration here thing, pounded on my keyboard, registering, all the time muttering, how dare they think that nobody up here in the north cares about proportional representation, you know? So today I want to share with you my experiences with the people of the north and their opinions about electoral reform in proportional representation. Before the recent federal election, I offered to distribute door hangers provided by Fair Vote Canada. The door hangers suggested that the people contact the candidates and just ask the candidates, would you be willing to support proportional representation? The door hanger also went into information as to our system now and what a proportional representation change would help. So I walked as fast as I could go up and down the streets in the rain, wind, snow, and sometimes sun, placing hangers on door hangers on all the doors. Most people were not at home during when I delivered these hangers, but I still met a lot of people who wanted to get proportional representation even after 3 failed referendums. I still remember one day I was delivering door hangers, and after I left, a guy came out, looked at the door hanger, and I just happened to look back at the same moment, and he yelled, "Thank you!" I was taken aback. Who says thank you for a door hanger? What else could I say? I said, "You're welcome," I yelled back. Another woman met me at the door who stated in frustration, "I voted for this the last 3 times. "I know," I answered. Another time, a man asked me with a huge sigh, "Do you think we will ever get proportional representation?" I said, "We can't give up." No, we cannot give up. But in those moments, I realized just how important it was to get a fair voting system in place. In the North, people aren't ambivalent, but people are busy. We have a lot of farmers, and because farming isn't all that profitable, they're also holding down full-time jobs. And families, they don't have time to make phone calls to their MPs or MLAs to express their disappointment over the present system, and they sure won't be driving for a day and a half to make a 5-minute presentation. Oftentimes what I found is that the people up here just feel isolated, forgotten, and that they don't count. And ironically, I also feel that the right-of-centre voters in the Lower Mainland, for example, must feel the same isolation as the people up north do because they don't feel fairly represented either. Ladies and gentlemen of this task force, it is time to get a new fair system put in place for our next provincial election. A fairer system would help people feeling that their votes count and that their voices will be heard. It must be done now. Well, actually, it should have been done a long time ago. So let's get on with it. And I firmly believe that British Columbia should be the first province to implement proportional representation. I mean, why not? We are the renegades, we are the innovators, and we have a lot of smart people capable of figuring out the best proportional representation system for our province. And that means looking at the fact that we have population differences, we have geological barriers, and all of that. So no doubt it will be challenging, but we have to do it. British Columbians are demanding it, and we should give it to them. Let us be the beacon of being the first, as a hope and light to the rest of all of Canada's provinces to get their proportional representation systems in, and the federal government to do the same. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Are there any questions? Emily Shaw.
Thank you for your presentation, Elizabeth, and your work. And it seems to me you truly do care about the future that we have in this province, in this country. I'm wondering, in your efforts, door knocking across Prince George, whether you've encountered individuals who have strong support for the current system, the first past the post, and what is typically their argument when they try to make their case that we're fine where we are. And how do you typically respond to that?
Actually, the funny thing of it is, in all the days I spent door knocking a couple days, or hanging up door hangers for a couple days, I didn't meet anybody who was negative to me. I was quite surprised. I thought, for sure, I'm going to hit, I guess I had a bias in the back of my mind that a lot of people either didn't care or didn't want proportional representation, but I did not find that to be the case. Everybody was very supportive. If someone had been, there was one gentleman that didn't know anything about our voting system kind of thing. So anyway, he came out of the door and we sat together on his front steps, and he had a puppy, and I held the puppy. He looked at my flyer and my door hanger thing, and I explained what system we had now, what proportional representation would mean, and he was very responsive. At the end of it, he said, well, what do I do next? And I said, go to this website. It's a good place to start. So, yeah, I did expect negative people somewhere, but I didn't hit anybody.
Deputy Chair.
Thanks very much, Madam Chair. Thanks very much for the presentation. Can you elaborate a little bit more on the door hanger that you were providing? Can you explain to us what...
I have one in my purse I could show you.
That would be fantastic.
Cool.
Because it leads me, thank you, it leads me to my second question.
Yes.
Is, of all the proportional representation models that are out there, which one or two do you favor?
To be honest, I don't really have a favorite at this point. I've read through a lot of different ones. I think I would support any system which would make the system fairer in that percentage of votes equals percentage of seats in whatever way that could be done. So I could support any system that would do that.
All right.
MLA Claire.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for your presentation, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
When you're talking about percentage of seats favoring the percentage of representatives in the House, how do you deal with the significant problem of regional representation, given the diverse nature of our province in terms of resources and attitudes on particular issues, ranging things from hunting and fishing and recreational use to use of land, private property, things like DRIPA and so on.
Right.
How do you see getting regional representation into that mix when you're talking about straight proportional with percentages?
I'm not entirely sure. Matthew had just talked about the system in Sweden, I believe now, that does try and do a proportional, regional. The way it was explained to me is that perhaps we can have larger constituencies with two MLAs or something like that. Like I said, I have complete confidence that people who know what they're doing will be able to come up with a system that will take those things into account, because it is important. Because we do have a lot of differences. Like the people up north are concerned about things like moose drinking well water that's oil and gas well water kind of thing that's contaminated with carbon, carbon stuff, the petroleum stuff, and all that, that might not even be thought of in the southern part of the province. So all of that has to be taken in consideration, but I'm still confident that we can come up with a system that's going to be fair.
Thank you.
Okay, I see no further questions. Thank you, Elizabeth, for your time today and for sharing.
Oh, thank you.
Sheldon, this is the... Next, we have Hillary Crowley. Welcome, Hillary. And thank you for joining us this morning. So just a reminder, you can present to us, and then we will have time for questions.
Okay. So I've been hearing all about proportional representation, and that's the bulk of my presentation. But I am talking about a lot of other things that I don't think are democratic. So thank you for this opportunity to present on this important issue. I promoted a system of proportional representation for many years now. The problem is that whichever party gets elected into government, they don't want to change it, as they are enjoying the total power given them by being elected through first past the post, even if they receive considerably less than 50% of the vote. True democracy should see a government represented proportionately according to the percentage of votes received by each political party. The last thing we want is a two-party system. We can see how harmful that is to our neighbours to the south. This would seem to be a perfect time to change to a more democratic, proportional system. There should be no need for a referendum, as the case for proportional representation is strong, as already witnessed in many other countries. We don't want to delay the process and wait years maintaining the regressive first past the post before a decision is made. Our MLAs and MPs are elected by the constituents, but too often the constituents' concerns are not represented when the MLAs and MPs have to toe the party line and vote according to the leader's instructions. We should not have whipped votes. The taxpayer should be the only ones holding the whip. A serious erosion of democracy is caused by corporate influence. There needs to be more restrictions on corporate lobbying and donations to government or political parties. Our forestry industry and the oil and gas industry seem to have way too much power over the government, negating the public concerns regarding climate change and preservation of our wildlife and natural environment. It used to be that corporations had a social license and would ensure they benefited the communities in which they operated. Not so now. The products and profits are largely shipped out of country, and the CEOs are the main ones benefiting from the destruction of our environment as the wealth leaves our land. Too often we hear that the job of the opposition is to oppose the government. This makes no sense. The parties should work together to form consensus. Certainly, the opposition party needs to critique the government, but their job should not be to oppose it. We need more parties represented to work together to form policies which benefit the majority of Canadians. I think an ideal government would actually be run totally by independents. This may be too big a stretch at this stage, so let's start with a system of proportional representation. British Columbia should lead the way, as we so often do, and ensure that proportional representation is on the agenda of the current session. We can then hold the Federal Liberal Party to account and encourage Canada to follow suit. In British Columbia, we witnessed an abandonment of democracy when Kevin Falcon abandoned the United Party in the last provincial election and instead endorsed the Conservative Party, although candidates had already been nominated under the United Party banner. Those candidates and their constituents were then at the mercy of John Rustad and the Conservative Party of BC. If we had a system of proportional representation, both parties would have been able to run and elect MLAs according to the popular vote of each party, together with the NDP and Greens. We would then have had a truly representative provincial government. Two-party systems only create hostility, the worst of which is seen to the south. We must make sure we never descend to those depths of hatred and incompetence. Too often in Canada, parties get elected with 40% of the vote or less, but get 100% of the power. This is not democratic. Too many constituents are left disenfranchised, and gradually their trust in government and the election process is eroded, leading to more and more citizens not bothering to vote. We urgently need to introduce a system of proportional representation to correct this trend. Lowering the voting age to 16 would also help to engage more citizens. It is the youth who are going to be most affected by the decisions we make today, particularly concerning climate change. They certainly deserve the right to vote. In the last federal and provincial election, there was too much strategic voting. In both cases, the electorate, not wanting to see Pierre Poilievre or John Rustad seize power, voted for the strongest alternatives, the NDP in BC and the Liberals federally. This helped cement the two-party system, which can lead to further regression in democracy. We should also ban omnibus bills, which are introduced by the party in power. These bills are so huge that parliamentarians cannot effectively debate them. They nearly always lead to an imposed time restraint, which means they pass without due debate or consent. Much change is needed, but let's start with changing our voting system to proportional representation and let British Columbia lead the way. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Hillary. Excuse me, Emily Botterill.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Hillary, for your presentation. I really appreciate it. I expect I'll have a number of questions, but the question I'd like to start with is you made a point as part of your presentation on eliminating free or making free votes the way to do things rather than having MLAs whipped for a particular party view. And I was wondering if you could just talk a bit more about that.
Well, it seems that the leader of the party holds so much power. So I know more about it federally. I think it's probably not quite so bad provincially. Okay, okay, it's just as bad provincially. But the constituents elect their MLAs wanting their concerns to be met, whereas if other people have more influence on the leader and they can whip the vote, say this is what this party stands for and this is the way you must vote on this, and it's just not right. Like, as I said, I think it would be wonderful if everybody was independent, just like municipal governments usually are. But that's too big a stretch to go from where we're at now to that. But I think to not whip the votes enables much more democracy, and each individual MLA can speak their truth and what they believe in.
Thank you. Hillary, you also mentioned the piece about donations and more rules on industry donations. So here, and I don't know if that you meant that federally, but here in the province, our government did introduce the legislation that has passed where it's only individual donations.
Well, I know that's true during an election, but what about all year long?
Always. Yeah,
Okay.
You can't have industry or union or any large donations. It's individual donations only in BC.
Then how do they have so much power?
Who?
The corporations. Oh, but they do. It's through lobbying, I guess.
That's different, yeah.
Okay, so thank you for correcting me on the donations, but maybe something needs to change about lobbying. You can't deny the oil and gas industry and the logging industry have tremendous power on government decisions.
Okay, Deputy Chair.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Well, I'll disagree a little bit on that. If you look at the state of our forest industry, I'm quite sure that the industry would like to be able to sustain themselves, and they're not in that situation right now. So we'll agree to disagree on that, because I don't think the forest industry has as much power as you think they have. Further on your question about the free votes, do you see an opportunity where there would have to be a change in legislation so that free vote or non-confidence votes would only be in particular areas of legislation or bills and not in all bills? Because
non-confidence is only on financial matters, isn't it?
No. No, you can, as in Bill 14 and Bill 15, it was determined by the government that there was going to be a non-confidence vote. So if the bill failed, the government would fail. So again, if you suggested that the bills were flawed and there was more time to be used on the bills, you could have defeated the bills and gone back to work. But because they were identified as non-confidence votes, the government if the government wanted to stay in power, they had to vote for it. So would you suggest that we have additional legislation where you can only use non-confidence votes in financial matters?
Yes, I would.
All right.
I guess there's a lot I don't know about government, and maybe you don't until you become an MLA. But certainly I thought that confidence votes were over the budget and financial matters.
No, that's not true. The second part I'd ask you is when you talked about having everybody as an independent, and you suggested on a municipal level that in most cases most councillors are rowing in the same direction, well, maybe not so much at the legislature. How would you get everybody in the room to be able to agree on something other than just it's a good idea? How do you able to, if you've got multiple ideas from multiple people, how do you actually get them to consistently maintain a government?
They can form committees. Mm-hmm. They do it the same way as municipalities do. So you can still introduce a bill, and the House votes as they see fit on the bill.
And to add to that, some municipalities, especially in the larger metropolitan areas, have slates.
Well, I know Vancouver does, but they're in the minority.
That's true, but I'm just using it as an example. As municipalities grow, a lot of times I don't like slates. I was in municipal politics. I don't particularly like slates. I like the opportunity where you can be at a meeting, you can have an opportunity for ideas and solutions, and then come up with your own vote, not have somebody tell you what to do. But in some of the larger areas, that's been effective, but it's also been counter-effective. So is it something that you think that we can overcome if we had some form of proportional representation where you can still have that continuity of government and not having some jurisdictions where every year they're having another election because they can't seem to get together?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not talking at this time about having everybody independent, because I think that's too big a stretch. Mm-hmm. But I definitely want to change the system to proportional representation. And I think if you choose a suitable system, you don't have to have multiple elections. They can be just as stable a government as current governments are. for sure. It doesn't mean that you increase the number of elections necessary.
All right. Thank you for that.
MLA Clare.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hillary, it's very nice to see you and
you,
Floyd
Sheldon.
in the gallery there. I just wanted to open by thanking you for your community involvement and your service as a candidate in many elections, as a Green Party candidate. I know you've brought a lot of passion and energy to many issues, and I know we've seen each other on trails occasionally doing a little bit of work there, and I very much wanted to just flag that and thank you for that.
Thanks, Sheldon.
When you were talking about confidence matters and saying that only financial issues should be confidence votes, what about issues in which there are significant changes proposed that would radically affect the province or the culture of groups of people and so on? Government sometimes makes such issues confidence matters because of the effect that they may have. And this is sometimes done as a tactic. Sometimes it's done because they feel something might be defeated by the opposition, in which case there could be an election. And it's part of the Westminster parliamentary process, which is an adversarial process, quite historically. That's why we have a raucous question period in which we yell and scream from two sword lengths apart. But how do you feel about confidence motions on other contentious issues besides financial ones?
I would far rather that people can vote their conscience and not be whipped and have to agree with the party line.
Well, I mean, I think there's various degrees of how whipping takes place. I am the deputy whip for the Conservative caucus.
I didn't know that.
And I can assure you we have a pretty free-minded group that takes a lot of liberties with how they're going to vote. And we find that sometimes helpful and sometimes not so much, but it is what it is. And I think that there are times which are not just the voting on things like the finances and the budget, where a confidence vote might be necessary. And
Okay.
I just wanted to flag
I can accept that for sure, but I just think it shouldn't be the norm for all votes to be whipped and you have to vote this way.
Well, in that case, and if I just follow up, Madam Chair, what about if you are in a party and you're running on policy and you've managed to sell your policy to the voting public such that you are in a position, either you're in government or in opposition, or you're in a third party or a fourth party or a seventh party or whatever, however many it happens, with two seats being able to form a party. If you have a situation where this is clear party policy on which the party and its candidates ran, would you not see that such a matter would be something to have a whip vote on?
I think you could vote against the party. For myself, when I did run for the Green Party, I had a different point of view on the gun lobby compared to the rest of the party. But I made that statement obvious before I was accepted as a candidate and spoke about it during the elections. And if I had been elected and something came up about that, I would have gone against the party line on that issue. So I think all the MLAs should feel free to do the same thing on issues they feel important about that may not be in agreement with the party.
And that's an excellent example, and I well remember your principled stand, which you articulated quite accurately, and that's something you ran on, and I would see that as something that you would hold to, even in the face of the Green Party and their very aggressive House leader and
Never mind.
and so on. But anyway, thank you, Hillary. I do appreciate your candor and your answers.
Okay, thanks, Sheldon.
Just to follow up on that question, I think that's a nuanced position, because what if your constituents don't agree with your position on, let's say, that issue, and they don't want you to vote that way? Then where does that come into your position versus representing your constituents?
If they elected you as their candidate knowing what your position was, I think you could feel free to vote your conscience.
Thank you. MLA Shaw.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I think you bring up some really great points, very also philosophically poignant points as well, and I appreciate that. And while, of course, from what I've heard so far in our engagements and over the years, I know that there may not be a bulletproof and fully perfect electoral system, although we've heard from many presenters that that should not prevent us from respecting the appetite for change from the current system. I'm wondering your thoughts about whether you think our youth in the province have enough of an opportunity to be educated about our current government system and how it works, and whether you think that there should be an extra effort or emphasis placed on education around government systems in the K-12 education system, especially if we were to consider lowering the voting age. Mm-hmm. And so, I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that, because what's quite evident is that education around, government systems or civics or social studies, specifically about the government structure of BC, is not standard across the province. And so, yeah.
No, definitely I think civics needs to be increased, and I think mock elections within the school system is a great way of showing the different systems of voting. Like, I would suggest that they had the chance to vote the single transferable vote proportionate system in mock elections in schools, having already been taught more about politics than currently. I'm not familiar with the school curriculum. I don't know how much they are taught at the moment, but certainly education for the general public also would be much better to serve the electorate on what parties believe what. Like, some people have promoted mandatory voting, but so many adults don't know enough to have a mandatory vote. So I think education for everything is a huge priority, and so in K-12, yes. And I think part of that should be learning about proportional representation and the different systems.
Thank you. Emily Botterill. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Earlier this morning, and certainly in previous meetings, there's been discussion about how to achieve that regional representation in a proportional representation system, and so one of the foundations in democracy is one person, one vote, and to respect that while at the same time implementing a system that enables larger representation proportionate to vote in this part of the world where the ridings are very large. So I guess just a question from my perspective, it'd be helpful to hear your thoughts on if the government did proceed with proportional representation, where it used a model of regionally larger ridings as sort of a top-up. How would you see that those regional MLAs, say in this part of the world, which would have a riding that's even larger than MLA Clare's, how would you see them? What suggestions do you have on how they would keep in touch with their constituents?
Yeah, well, the two systems that I'm most familiar with, the proportional single single transferable vote and the mixed member proportional. And for the single transferable vote to work proportionally, you would have to be able to vote for more than one MLA. Otherwise, it would just be the same as first past the post. So in order to not increase the size of the legislature, you would have to amalgamate some of the ridings. So in this area, it could be Prince George Mackenzie and Prince George Valemont going together, or even Prince George Mackenzie, Prince George Valemont. It's not called Prince George Caribou. Prince George North Caribou, thanks, going together, which I agree is a vast riding, but if each component of that riding, like the existing ridings now, still put forward the same number of candidates that they do in most elections, so then you would have a list of, say, maybe 12 candidates to choose from, and once the most popular candidate reached the quota that was agreed on by the Elections BC, then the next vote would transfer to the next most popular candidate. The chances are that you would still get a candidate in your specific riding. It's possible that you might not. It's possible somebody might choose all three candidates from a riding that you don't live in, but it seems unlikely. But at least the outcome would be proportionate to the votes received by the electorate in the area. For Prince George people, it wouldn't really make much difference, but for people in Mackenzie, and do you go as far as Williams Lake?
Yes.
And Williams Lake and Valemont, then yes, it would be very difficult to reach your MLA unless they happen to be from those communities. But with all the Zoom and internet and phone and everything, it's a lot easier than it used to be, and I think it's quite doable.
Thank you.
Did I answer your question?
Yeah, no,
Okay.
I did. Yeah. I ask open-ended questions, not
Okay.
leading questions.
I'll go next to the Deputy Chair.
Thanks very much, Chair. To further up on that, I just want to use an example where I think a lot of people, particularly in the Lower Mainland, don't appreciate what's actually involved in what an MLA's duties entail when you're in a larger area. Even in my R2 ridings in Kamloops, because of the electoral gods that decided to change it up again, Kamloops North Thompson is actually Kamloops North Thompson and South Thompson. So having said that, I have 5 municipalities, I have 6 First Nations, and a regional district. The other MLA, who's in Kamloops Centre, only has 1 municipality and 1 regional district. So, you know, it's so totally different when you're living in the Lower Mainland, and we can use Surrey as an example, where you can pretty much see the other end of your riding if you look out the window. So it's totally different when you're trying to, like you mentioned, using Zoom and everything else to try to reach out, but that's not really how it works. So I'm trying to figure out when we have a STT transferable vote, or even if we have multiple different ways of setting this up, how we can do it equitably, knowing that we've got population densification in the Lower Mainland, and then we end up coming out in the other areas where it may not be rural, it's semi-urban, yet you still have all these additional responsibilities on an MLA. How are they supposed to be able to service it? I mean, you could say in Kamloops with the 2, Peter Millibar could be the senior, like a senator MLA, and I would be the junior MLA because he has more seniority than me. But that isn't necessarily fair to me because I'm the one that's running around with my head cut off, and he gets to sit in Kamloops. So how would we actually get through that process? It's one thing to talk about having a fair representation of parties all over the place so that there's a wide variety of views, but how does the MLAs that are actually there be able to facilitate their duties in a proper way when you've got such a huge geographical area and all you're worried about is how many votes that each MLA represents?
But for the example I gave of Prince George Mackenzie, Prince George Valemount, Prince George North Caribou, you would still elect 3 MLAs, same as are elected now. So I don't think it would change a whole lot. You still, not necessarily, but you may still have 1 MLA from each of those 3 regions, which would be identical to how it is now. But you may get 2 from one and 1 from one and none from the other is a possibility. You just have to work harder to get the views of people in all of those areas. Like federally, it goes from Prince George right up to the Alaska border and east to the Alberta border and west to just west of Prince George. I mean, way bigger than the provincial ridings that, although they're huge, it's still...
It's larger.
Yeah, and people manage.
They try. Thank you.
Emily Botterill.
Thanks very much, Madam Chair. I will note that there are some ridings that have may not be geographically quite as big as MLA Claire's that also involve huge logistical issues to access and a wide range of constituents. And so in my riding, for example, I have a riding with 14 First Nations in the riding, 3 municipalities, the Islands Trust, which is a local government, and 200 or 300 islands. So it's a challenge too, even though I'm in southern BC. The question I want to follow up on is just from your perspective and sort of maybe circling back a bit. There also seems to be a balance. I want to come back to free votes. There also seems to be a balance, whether we're in or there could be a balance to be had, and I'd like your thoughts on it, around needing party representation in order to effectively build consensus. And what I mean by that is that at some stage or another in a proportional representation system, the parties that are elected to the legislature will presumably be seeking to find common ground, and it'll be necessary for the parties to be able to express the support of their MLAs for a particular viewpoint and not have it undone by free votes. So I just wonder what your thoughts are on that particular consideration as well.
I'm not sure if I can get my head around that. Certainly, with having more parties like represented proportionately, there'd be much more need for consensus building amongst the parties. And that's why I'm so against a 2-party system where the produces so, or may produce so much hostility between the systems, and all the good done by one government can be torn apart by the next government. So that's why I think a proportional government is way better in building consensus. I haven't thought how a free vote would affect that. I would still think it should be okay. So, yeah, I still think it would work.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's helpful. I mean, I know that the Green Caucus, we have the ability to make free votes, and we're in an accord with the NDP. So,
yeah. But
I just wanted to ask you that.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Emily Claire.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Now, in this super region that you described, which would be quite a varied region, it would be massive, and I can't compare this with the federal situation because the federal responsibilities are quite different. We have, as my constituency assistant once said to me, we're much more in the weeds. We have to deal with things like roads and bridges, and you probably heard some singing about that, but we have, in the situation we have now, we have direct and clear responsibilities for clearly defined geographical areas. And if we were to create this massive thing with multiple MLAs who are sort of floating around randomly, would that not create confusion in the minds of the voters of who their actual representative is? Would there be a lack of understanding? Because I can assure you right now, people know who their representative is in Prince George, North Caribou, just as they know who their representatives are in Prince George, Valemount, and Prince George, Mackenzie. I think there is no doubt about who you call when you have a problem. And I think we are quite happy in all of the MLAs that I am aware of on all sides of the House to respond in a timely and respectful manner to anyone who brings forth a concern, regardless if it's something that we personally support or not. And I've already been dealing with many concerns from people who I'm sure wouldn't have voted for me. Not that there are very many. But nonetheless, I think a focused approach of having clearly defined areas with a clearly defined representative is something that is laudable. And I just wondered what you thought about that.
I can see advantages of what you're saying, but also I don't think it's a disadvantage. You would still have your 3 MLAs for the same 3 ridings that you would have now, like in an STV system. And if you had concerns, you could either contact the MLA that lives closest to you in your riding, or you might want to choose one that belongs to a party that you are think might act more favorably to what your concern is. You could contact any one of the 3, or all 3. I don't think it should make your access to government any less as a concerned citizen.
I can assure you people already do contact all 3 or multiple MLAs. I can show you my phone. It's full of mass media mailings and emails and so on from... Yes, and yeah.
Good.
and I understand that, but how would that change if the majority of people in this super riding still voted a particular way? And even if there was a proportional system, the elected representatives here all had significant majorities.
Just over 50%.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or well over 50%.
Well, you probably had more than the other 2. But I looked, it was around 50%. So I take it I haven't answered your question, but I can't think what else to say on that. I think as a concerned citizen, I would feel free to contact any one of the 3, and I would choose the one that lived closest to me or the one I felt most aligned with politically.
Okay, because I know our processes are that if someone is a constituent of one of the other MLAs, we refer them to that. So like my office right now has hundreds of files, and we focus on the hundreds of files that are in our riding. And if someone from another riding has a concern, that is given to the other member. Now, sometimes there's overlapping concerns where you have property in one riding and you live in another, and what we do is we work collaboratively to try to work out the situation.
I think you could still do the same.
So we don't need to change anything.
Yes, you do. We want the seats in the House to be elected proportionately according to the popular vote. That's what we want to see.
Thank you. I don't think I have a huge question here. I think we've had a pretty interesting conversation around not just representation of different political views, which I think in a proportional representation system, you can't fully rid yourself of partisan inclinations. But I mean, it's definitely worth a conversation to differentiate between access to your member versus representation of a particular set of values, which can be done so through an individual. which at the end of the day, I think is why people have faith and confidence in a particular individual and therefore trust them to bring their views to the legislature. And so, I mean, I know we all of us are trying to wrap our heads around the difference between the rural set of challenges when it comes to different systems and also urban set of challenges that comes with different systems. Geography certainly being one of them, incredible density also being one of them, considering the amount of diversity that brings as well. But I'm wondering, what are your thoughts about how to take away some of that partisanship that you've referenced a few times, which can become quite toxic in nature when you have a set, a group of individuals with a set number of values who toe the party line. I mean, the same could happen in a proportional representation system, and previous presenters have pointed out jurisdictions across the world in which that is very much so the case, and matter of fact, hyperpartisanship, which leads to the breakdown of government. Could you maybe comment on that, or maybe talk about whether our values and our culture here in Canada would allow for more of a facilitation and of different viewpoints and consensus building? Or do you think that it could be a situation which just further fuels hyperpartisanship and we may not come to consensus?
I'm going to answer the last part first. I think as long as we do it soon enough, that the situation in Canada can certainly facilitate more cooperation. If we go further down the line, compared to what's happening down south, I think that toxicity can also spread into our politics. We might be seeing a little bit of that federally already. And so I think it's really important that we change our system to proportionality as soon as possible, so we do concentrate more on consensus building. As far as having a few elite people with a certain point of view sticking together to bring forward something, you would have to have, many countries say 5% of the vote before you can be one of the parties in the pro-rep system. Whatever is decided, it tends to eliminate a small number, if it's just a small number of radicals having too much power. If the majority of people agree with the radical point of view, well, then they're going to get more power. But I don't think that's the situation in Canada as it stands right now. But I think the longer we leave it, the more that two-party system gets strengthened, the more it can lead to that hostility and toxicity.
Thank you. And we'll take our final question from MLA Botterill.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your presentation this morning. This did come up yesterday. I'm just going to build on the earlier question from MLA Shaw. The whole issue of consensus, building towards consensus, and avoiding very toxic oppositional environment you see, say, emerging south of the border has been something that's been raised, and it's been raised in the context of, by one of the presenters anyway, of moving to proportional representation is certainly an option, but we don't have a tradition in Canada, in BC, of consensus based, and so it's unlikely that proportional representation would succeed. And I'm maybe not paraphrasing it quite as clearly as I might, but can you just talk briefly about how you would see moving to proportional representation as an electoral system fostering consensus-based or collaborative decision-making?
Well, I think the very nature of proportional representation leads to consensus building. Like, you're going to have more parties represented in the government, and the only way they can get their bills passed is cooperating together. And I disagree with that comment that it's unlikely to happen. I mean, when there was a referendum in BC, they got 58% of the vote, and it needed 60% to pass. That was, 15 years ago, I think. I think there's much more interest in proportional representation and a better understanding of it now than there was back then. And all the new democracies around the world, they don't even look at first past the post. They go directly to a system of proportional representation. And there's many stable countries with proportional representation, like New Zealand, Germany, Scotland, many countries, and I think we just look at their systems, look at the flaws, pick out what works best, and adopt that system. That's my opinion.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Harry, for your presentation and for taking all of our questions. Thank you. Next, we have Gwen Johansson. We'll see. Welcome, Gwen, and thank you for presenting to our committee today. So, as the setup is, you will present to us, and then we will ask you questions. Thanks.
Thank you very much for bringing the committee to Prince George and coming out into the hinterlands to get the opinions that are sitting out here. I don't have particular expertise in governing, and so what I'm about to talk about is based on basically 22 years in local government, municipal government, and just observations that I've made along the way in the last 50, 60 years, I guess. And so it's not based on learning that I came across in a political science course, or I'm sort of strictly from the grassroots. So I don't have any particular expertise in electoral systems and the pros and cons of various different kinds of them. I think that you probably have access to that kind of expertise, and you've probably heard a lot about the problems that we've got with first past the post. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about which proportional representation would be the best system for us or whatever. But so I have maybe 4 points, and I won't belabor that first one on what we should do, what we should go to, because I don't have any background in that. But what I do believe is that everybody should feel that they have a path to go to somebody who has access, who is an MLA or has access to MLAs. And I think that there's a lot of cynicism out there right now in the public, and certainly a lot of frustration and unhappiness, and that's because there are a lot of people out there that don't feel that they have a path to go and find somebody who can do something for them to solve their problem. So that's the basis, I think, of what your changes ought to be looking at. And I just think you can add my name to the list of yes, we need to change, and I'll let it go at that. And so The second thing that I wanted to talk about, though, is representation by population. And it's got its advantages because it's very cut and dried, and you try and I'm sure that the committee sets up the electoral ridings and so on, they have a very firm basis to make their decisions on, and it's very, and they try very hard to make sure that they do balance the number of people that they represent as much as they can. But I'm not sure that that is maybe the best way. There might be some other things. I'm thinking of, I think it was, it was Delta, I believe, that came out and objected to the sort of balkanization of their communities. And so you had some discussion of it with the earlier speaker, and I think that you could look at whether, say, for instance, if you're looking at Prince George, and there's 3 ridings in Prince George, and so they have to take a chunk of the population from Prince George and apply it to some of the rural areas, and so Prince George gets cut up quite a bit. But on the other hand, if you look at Prince George, maybe they have more issues in common, and so maybe you could look at something like a more subjective look at the municipalities. And so maybe in Delta, and I don't know a lot about Delta, but maybe their community as a whole has some, it would be easier for one person to represent that than to try and cover part of Delta and part of whatever rural areas is contributed or is put in his riding. And I think maybe this, I don't know whether the same thing would happen in Prince George. I do know that Prince George Mackenzie, if you look at Prince George Valemont, say, that starts in Prince George, it goes all the way down to McBride, through the whole Robson Valley, down to Valemont, and head down to Blue River, and then it finally ends at Ebola, which is pretty well to Kamloops. So it's a huge riding, and I don't know whether it would be better to have Prince George as one riding and then have a rural area, and you sort of touched on this in the last presentation. One of the things I did talk to a previous MLA about a possibility of something like that, and one of the points that was made was, because there's always a tendency, well, we'll just make more ridings, and that will make it easier. And the point that was made by that ex-MLA was that she didn't need more MLAs. What she would have liked and have been able to service her community better by was if she had more resources for her municipal offices. And maybe that would serve, you would have an MLA for maybe a very large area, but you would have more resources to have constituency offices in the different areas instead of just one in the central Prince George. So that's one thing that could be thought through, perhaps. I think that it's hard for one MLA to get their head around just so many different issues that are in a huge riding. It's just, but if you had a representative, an assistant in each one of those areas, they could develop the expertise for that particular area, perhaps, and maybe that's the way it would work. Now you're going to get all kinds of pushback, gerrymandering the areas and all kinds of stuff, but anyway, that's a possibility. As to the role of parties, I think it is true that the first past the post tends to gravitate towards a system where it's the two parties. And I don't think that I think that it's unfortunate if we go to just strictly two parties, because they're just going to be at loggerheads, and they're all going to be focused on the same issue, because whatever the main issue of the day is, they're going to be focused on that, and then they end up with we get the kind of paralysis that we've seen, well, at the federal level, I would say, for a number of years, and because there's not enough of the other parties to be able to sort of push some of the new ideas and get some consensus going and so on. And I think that's true also of British Columbia politics. Maybe, I don't know that you can't command there to be several parties. I mean, somebody has to do something on their own once in a while, right, and initiate some things. But I think that there is a role for individual smaller parties, and there's also a role or it could be a role for independents. And it's interesting, in the last provincial election, that the independents didn't fare well. And there were some very effective MLAs among those who did not get elected as independents. And there is, I think, just a belief out there that unless you're part of a party, you can't get anything done. I think that we have, proof of somebody who was an independent. Vicky Huntington did get elected as an independent, first one since the 1920s in British Columbia, I believe. She was also, though, the only one that's ever been re-elected as an independent. And I think probably would have been re-elected had she chosen to run for a third term. But maybe that's just the uniqueness of the individual, I'm not sure. But I think that if you do have those kinds of people in there, it does add to the mix of representation within the government, because they have the freedom to go over and check into different issues. They aren't confined or restrained by the interests of the party and the dictates that come from the leader. So I think that I don't know how you encourage that, but the discussion about the education in high school, I think, is important, because I don't think I can remember listening to some people who had worked in the election, in the provincial election at one point, and had been told that they better go and vote. And so they'd been given rides to go and vote, and they went, and they had no idea when they got in there. And these are people of voting age, but they'd never been there before. They had no idea how you're going to vote it. There could be, I think, a better system, a civics course. I think it's covered in grade 11 high school social studies, but it's not. It's only a part of that curriculum. I think there could be a whole course that would cover that, and whether it gets to be an essential course or whether it's going to be a choice, I don't know what's the best way there, but we can do with a population that's much more in touch with the political decisions that are being made, I think. And it's not as though that's a new thing, and it's not as though the sort of the disinterest in politics or the lack of sort of feeling comfortable within the political, because if we consider where democracy sort of was spawned in Greece in about 500 BC, it was Pericles who was considered the father of democracy, and he was the one who sort of coined the saying that is still heard today around the fact that, well, you may not be interested in politics, Mr. Citizen, but politics is very interested in you. And that's very true. And that's, so this has been a flaw in the democratic system for a very long time, and we're not going to get away from that. But people who know about how the system works, they're much more likely to be willing to go over and offer their opinions and so on. So that's what I have to say about the role of parties. The other thing that I wanted to talk a little bit about is the direction of representation, because in theory, the democratic system is kind of like an inverted funnel. So you've got all the people at the bottom, and they kind of they have issues, and the issues come to up the line through the funnel, and the ones, there's some get solved along the way, there's some make it all the way maybe to the legislature and maybe to the cabinet and so on. But sometimes I've watched what goes on now. It seems as though the representation is going the other way, that the parties are developing positions and then they're sent out to the hinterlands to tell the folks how they should be thinking about something. And I think that and that may partly be because people in the hinterlands maybe are not thinking very much about what they ought to be thinking about in Victoria. That could be. But if they had a little more knowledge about it and a little more background on how to maneuver and stick handle through the bureaucracy, maybe they would get there. So I don't have anything more. I guess that's my point about that, is that just that who's representing who. We should be there should be a two-way flow of information there, and sometimes I don't think there is, which is probably the fault of we the public more than it is of the MLAs. But anyway, so I don't have anything more to add to it, but if I'll answer any questions that you have or that I think I can answer. Anyway, don't know that I can answer very many, but anyway.
Thank you, Gwen, for your presentation. I'll go to MLA Clare.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Gwen, thank you so much for coming and for your heartfelt presentation. I appreciate your words. And I wanted to just look at one of the points you raised, which I was very interested in, is the need for more resources in larger rural ridings. It's something that I raised as well, and it's very near and dear to my heart. Because as you can appreciate, in a riding where you have over 50 communities, you have 2 regional districts, you have multiple health authorities, 2 of the main ones, and then Native Health as well, and just such a range of resource extraction and a range of issues which may not be similar to a very compact type riding where the issues are often very much more limited than the wide variety we get in a larger rural riding. Like we get mining, forestry, WSB, ICBC, we get housing, homeless, coupled with the rural ones, because we have rural issues and we have urban issues. And one of the things we try to do is to have multiple offices. Multiple offices require multiple staff. And when we have limited budgets, being able to have multiple staff and be able to pay them to be able to deal with the problems with direct personal contact becomes more problematic, especially when you have people who would have to drive 5 hours or more to get to an office at one end of the riding. So I'm very interested in that point. And I know whether there are financial challenges that the province faces, that it's something that's worth looking into. And I also wanted to just ask you about positions being developed. Many of my colleagues on all sides of the House go out and make direct contact with people through door knocking and outreach and so on. And that door knocking does provide a means of developing policy and politics, party policies. Policies is of the people, from the people. That's where you get things from them. And I know when we knocked on our 14,000 doors and talked to some 6,000 people, we got a very clear idea of the issues in the riding in Prince George North Caribou. And what other ways do you see might be useful to develop policy rather than direct personal contact, getting messages in mail and so on from people who then may join a party, go to conventions, vote on policy, and push them forward? Because I see it as much more bottom up than that may be perceived.
Well, I don't know. I didn't run into a situation, this was several years ago, and I don't know whether it exists now. I doubt it, and it maybe didn't exist everywhere at that time. But at the time, I was a president of an organization, and we had several hundred members, and it was a common issue across 2 ridings, rural ridings, and I used to send out invitations to the MLA, the 2 MLAs, whenever we were having a meeting, and invite them to come to the meeting, and they never came. And I often wondered about that, but anyway, time went on, and life happens, and then when I had finished with that particular group, something came up with another issue with the same MLA, and he explained to them, they were, wanting to have him come and have a, sort of meeting or some sort of interaction. And that particular MLA mentioned that the policy of that party at that time was to not go and attend these public meetings. And I thought that was very strange, but it explained why I hadn't been able to get them to the meetings that I wanted to get them to. And so I wondered, if this was a sort of a new wrinkle on representation, and maybe it had to do with things that were controversial, because things get controversial. And but anyway, it was an odd way to. So I don't know, but anyway, I think that one of the ways that MLAs can get information is by going to these. You see all the federal ones at the Calgary Stampede and learning how to flip pancakes. Mr. Carney was having some trouble with that, but anyway, I'm sure he'll get it corrected. And so, but I think that there is, you can become isolated in a position where you're elected, I think, because you have so many things to deal with, and you try and focus in on ones that maybe are widespread, that have the most interest or whatever. But I do think that having more people instead of putting the money into developing more ridings, it would be better to have more resources available to the MLAs to set up those places in these broad areas that become one riding.
Very much appreciate you raising it, because I'm trying to construct 2 offices. One's up and running since December, and the other's a gutted box. So, thank you for that.
Okay.
So my first question was, it was interesting, your piece about maybe building the ridings to be more connected to the issues. And feasibly what would that look like, right? So if, let's say, one riding was just Prince George, and then everything rural surrounding all of Prince George was one riding. I know, coming from an urban riding, it's difficult enough to be able to get to all of the community events, all of the things that folks want you at on the weekends when you're only home on 2 days and you're back in the legislature, and we have so much time constraint already in a smaller riding where I can get to everything within 30 minutes or an hour. I can only imagine what that would look like to build a riding that was just a rural riding, and how you would actually have meaningful contact with constituents, being a part of their community, and then also can't even imagine door knocking come election time and all that, and how, I guess, just your thoughts on all of that.
Well, I guess, it would be hard, right? That's, you have to concede that. But on the other hand, maybe there are more common issues amongst the rural people than there is between, say, the rural people and the Prince George people, the city, the urban area. But that is one of the great divides, and you just have to look at the electoral map of British Columbia now. It's pretty blue in the interior and the north, and it's pretty yellow in the lower mainland, and so I think that you're going to have problems whichever way you go, just by virtue of the geography and the population where it lives and so on. But I think that you would have to be able to hire people that make good constituency assistants. And that's one of the big things that, it's not going to be that easy. But that's the best that I could come up with. And for instance, there are some common issues like forestry, for instance. I mean, a lot of the North has an interest in forestry. A lot of the Northeast is got a huge issue around oil and gas, but also forestry. So resource extraction is an important issue that would probably sort of be highlighted in the rural areas. I mean, you're going to run into differences everywhere, no matter how you organize it, I think. Right?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think the casework perspective is one thing with constituency advisors and being able to hire more. It's another to have that presence of an MLA, and I think it's different from community to community, but I know in our communities, the physical presence of the MLA is something that is really demanded as well. And the second question I had was, you spoke about independence, and one of the questions that one of my colleagues had at a previous hearing was, when looking at a proportional representation system, how would the independence play into that? Would the independence running across the province be seen as one party, and what percentage independents generally get would reflect in a proportional representation system, or are they just kind of trying their best at running independently? And why I asked that is because we've seen, as you mentioned, that there's folks, you vote for the individual, but you're often voting for the party. And as soon as you are an independent, no matter how great of a job you've done in your area, if you're not aligned with the party, it's not often that you see. So you mentioned, Vicky Huntington, and then also we've had Chuck Cadman in Surrey, but they're very few and far between where independents are able to get elected. So just your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's the culture, that we've grown up in, and there is a belief out there that if you're going to get anything done, you have to be part of a party, and that's just the way it is, and so that's what we'll continue to do. And I don't see, I think probably the only way that you get independents elected probably is that, well, number one, there has to be a great deal of anger against the government in power, whichever one it is, and that's how Vicky got elected. And then the second thing is, once they get in there, they have to do a really exceptional job, and they have to know how to stick handle through the bureaucracy, and so yes, you have to have particular skills, I think, to be able to do that. But the smaller parties, they're also able to be very effective, and they have a lot more freedom, I think, because, at one time, the NDP was viewed as the conscience of the legislature, perhaps, or the House of Commons, and they weren't running maybe so much to be government, realistically, but they were very effective at getting new ideas brought, to the legislature, and picking up topics maybe that had been overlooked by the governing or the larger parties, simply because they've got more. They're able to have a broader view because maybe they're not constrained so much by the party philosophy or the party whip, maybe, perhaps. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Deputy Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks so much for the presentation. I had a couple of questions, but first off, when you talked about the two-party paralysis, would you agree that the way we have it right now, that both main political parties would have a fair representation in their caucuses from far left to far right?
Well, I don't know.
No, but I mean, would you think that with that many MLAs evenly distributed throughout the province, that if those two main parties, there would be a pretty wide range of people's beliefs in those parties. So that the NDP, for example, would have some on the far left and some to the center. The Conservative Party would have some in the center and some to the far right. Would you agree to that, with that statement?
I think that is has been true. I don't know whether it's true now.
So if we agree on that,
well, okay.
If we agree on that, then my second point is, and we brought this up the last couple of days, is free votes, in as much as that there seems to be a paralysis in our legislature, in the legislature, the way it works with free votes and confidence votes. And it seems like there's a lack of flexibility in the ability of either party to be able to push back either from leadership or poor legislation, exactly as we've talked about, and even the previous speaker with Hillary, when she said, you should be representing the wills of your residents. And if MLA Clare is representing the residents of his riding up here, and the party in power or even his party decides on a policy that is detrimental to the residents, and all the residents put up their hand and say, absolutely no way, I want you to vote against it, MLA Clare should be able to vote against it. Do you agree with that?
Yeah.
So do you think that having a mechanism where there is more free votes and more opportunity for flexibility in the party would help cover some of those discrepancies that people believe are in our system and not representing the whole spectrum of the populace?
Well, I would think so, and I don't think that free votes sort of indicate a weakness within the party. And that's probably where the orders come from, because somebody is afraid they're feeling very vulnerable, and the leader is feeling perhaps that he looks weak or something like that, or something. So there's a lot of egos involved in MLAs. Maybe you've noticed. I don't know. So I think, what we're looking for is good government, and it's not necessarily held in one bowl. And so, yes, some flexibility would be a good thing.
Appreciate that.
Thank you. I have a question built off that, and I don't know if it's for Gwen or for Ward, but the idea of looking at the free votes, and I think it raised in the last presentation, is how would you reconcile the idea that, okay, if an issue is raised in government which your riding doesn't agree with, is one thing. If it's another, if you philosophically don't believe in something, but it doesn't align with your party's views or necessarily with your region's views, and if you've made it known, fine, you've gotten elected on that, but then an issue raises in the legislature where all of a sudden everyone in your riding is saying, we don't want you to vote on this, and you have a free vote. And how would you reconcile those things? Is it free vote only to align with what your region wants, or is it free votes to align with what you personally want? Or, where do you see that?
You have to respect the wishes of your constituents, in that case, because they elected you to represent them. And so you have a responsibility to reflect, their wishes, I think.
Right, and I think it would be interesting to see if that's always the case that happens, with
right.
Free votes.
I don't know, but there used to be, no, you don't remember because you weren't born yet, but there was a time when the social credit was in power, and Mr. Bennett, W.A.C. Bennett was the premier, and he had, I can't remember who it was, but he had an MLA who gave him some trouble because he was a little bit off kilter with what Mr. Bennett always, wanted sometimes. But then on the other hand, the NDP, or at that time it would have been the CCF, I guess was. Anyway, they also had one. So Mr. Bennett would suggest, I'll trade you.
Crossing the floor.
And, but anyway, we survived that, but there seemed to be a little bit more flexibility in those times, So I think that we could get back to that. Maybe we've just gotten too full of ourselves, and so we don't feel that there's too much pressure, maybe. on the different parties and the party whips and the party leaders, to feel that if they loosened up a little bit, that maybe it would be okay.
Definitely an interesting conversation, given that often people are voting for the party, not an individual, and what that looks like. But thank you for the conversation. MLA Botterill.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I just want to circle back to MLA Stamer's points around differing views within the same party and creating, so you have a diversity of views, you go to a free vote system or more free votes, and then you actually indirectly, I think is the thrust of the question that he asked, generate the benefits of proportional representation without pursuing proportional representation, because you get the different views and everybody's happy and everybody can just carry on. So the question I'd like to explore is what you see, if anything, as the difference between that approach and an approach of proportional representation where, say, in this part of the world, voters that didn't vote, say, Conservative, have their voice represented in the numbers in the House. And I think just to, I think what you mentioned earlier was the benefits of smaller parties. Do you still see the benefits of smaller parties through proportional representation in the context of widespread free votes, where parties like the Conservatives and NP have a whole range of views and everybody votes their conscience or their constituency? Do those two work? Do you still need pro-rep?
Well, I think so, because I think that, you're never going to get a system where the parties are going to allow free votes on important issues. Like, I don't think you're going to go that far. And so, yeah, I think that there's a place for the small parties, because they have actually often ended up providing the most constructive suggestions for changes in legislation sometimes. I think that their role has been very strong, and sometimes providing the opposition to bills. And so I think that, and then you have some of the advantages of being in a party, but you have the freedom to be able to approach a question differently than some of the two main parties, if you get my drift. So I think that, and I don't know a lot about proportional representation, but it seems to me that you get more parties, generally speaking, if you have proportional representation than you do. And for whatever reason, and I don't understand why really, that it seems that first past the post sort of produces a system where it sort of evolves towards a two-party system, whereas proportional representation, from what limited part I understand about it, seems to generate more parties, and so that requires more collaboration. And I think we could do with more collaboration and a little less competition and name calling and stuff in the legislature.
MLA Shaw.
Great, thank you. And this is why I find this conversation so interesting, because there's that like we're trying to figure out sometimes the fundamental components of consensus building. Like, what does it take to do that? Because I've heard over and over again about pro-rep having that goal of consensus building, or using pro-rep, you could consensus build, or you're much more likely to consensus build. And that ties also into, I think, some observations about the system in which we have today. I mean, sometimes consensus building requires compromise, and compromise can come in the form of voting together on a particular item. And within the structure of a particular caucus, regardless of party, that consensus building can take shape in the form of a uniform vote. So I think in certain aspects, when we look at caucus voting together on things, it may not necessarily indicate good whipping. It could indicate consensus amongst individuals. But I so much appreciate that our focus, at least in my experience in the conversations we've had thus far, is an agreement that across the board we need to do a better job of working together to accomplish what we need to accomplish for the betterment of the province. And I hear that from most of the presenters, is that's what their intention is and their goal is with the views that they hold. So that's definitely very comforting for me, and likewise I'm very appreciative that you're here today to indicate just that.
Thank you. And I mean, look at you, you're all here, and you haven't fought once. I know.
We're getting there. I'm just kidding.
So there's hope.
Thank you. And I know we're pressed for time. I just want to make a quick point, just so people that are listening understand some of the dynamics, is that you could have a very thin, and I'm not using just our example in BC because it's really not fair, but it could be duplicated anywhere else. You could have a very slim majority as government, and you could have 3 or 4 caucus members that have decided that the government is going down the wrong direction, and they're not able to convince leadership of making some substantial changes. So they decide that they are not going to support, they're going to have a free vote, and they're going to actually make the government go back to the drawing board on what they're actually proposing. The problem with that is if it ends up being a non-confidence vote and the government falls, the leaders of those parties have the ability not to re-sign your papers, so now all of a sudden you're running as an independent. So that's a challenge. So you don't necessarily want to have 40 or 50 people running around without a common goal. But the reality is that if you do step outside of the lines, there is a risk, because the leadership at the time on any party can decide whether you're going to be still in that party and or you're going to be running in the next election. So you also have to be mindful of how far you can actually push back. Even if your residents, 100% of them want you to do that, are they going to support you in the next election as an independent? So you have to ask that question, because that's what ends up limiting some of the pushback when you're in caucus. So maybe my colleagues want to, say something, to add to that, but I think that's also the reality, is that we are governed by, having somebody sign our papers to be able to still continue if we so choose in that party.
Right, and that raises the question of whether the leader should have the right to decide who runs for his party.
Right, absolutely.
And that's a big question.
That's right.
And I'm sure that it would be very hard for a leader to go along with someone that he really disagreed with, but if the people decide that that's who they want to represent him, but then he has the opportunity to say, okay, but he can't come into my party.
That's right. No. Thanks so much for your time.
You're welcome.
It's definitely an interesting conversation that we've been having this morning, so thank you so much for taking your time to be a part of it, Gwen, and joining us today. Thank you to all of the presenters and everyone that came today. That's the last of our presentation, so if I could ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, this committee stands adjourned. Thank you.